So what we had done as of last week was we had talked about, we were just getting into like the types of questions. For the LEQ, this is the long essay question. We talked about how these are going to be questions that ask you to argue some kind of a point, that they come in 3 different varieties, and while you don't have to go through and go, okay, this is causation, okay, this is compare and contrast, that is very helpful, and I'm giving you some steps to go through of how to start kind of preparing your response and setting up your thesis for each different type. So the ones you're probably going to see the most of certainly this year are probably going to be the cause and effect ones. Although we might see some the continuity and change and the comparison, because oftentimes what they'll ask you to do on those is compare multiple time periods, and we may not have exactly covered enough content to do a lot of that just yet, but you'll certainly start seeing some more of those next year. So now what we want to do is break down the thesis statement and talk about thesis statements and what they need to have, and what I'll be looking for in a thesis statement, what AP readers are going to be looking for in a thesis statement, so forth and so on. So effective thesis statements. Now, you've written thesis statements before for other classes. We already talked last week about how this is kind of like the roadmap. This is the blueprint of where you're going with it. And a thesis statement, again, you've learned things in other classes that are not necessarily wrong. So I'm not saying that if you heard something that's different from this, it's not wrong. But when we write them in history, sometimes the things may be a little bit different. But specifically, I'm trying to teach you what they're going to be looking for on the AP exam. Now, we need to make sure that it fully addresses the question. These questions tend to be a little bit multifaceted, not quite as much as they used to be, but we need to make sure that we are addressing all parts of the question, that we are not just addressing part of it, particularly if it's one that kind of has multiple things going on. Again, I think some of the newer questions are a little bit easier to do that with. They don't have quite so many pieces to them. You don't have anything to compare it to, so you don't quite know what I'm talking about. But make sure we fully address the question. Now, here's the big thing. The thesis statements for these LEQs must be argumentative. That's the word that you're going to hear me use a lot, argumentative. Meaning that this is the take a position part, all right? Someone ought to be able to read your thesis statement and say, yes, I agree with that, or no, I do not agree with that, okay? So, for example, saying that George Washington was the first president of the United States, that's not argumentative, okay? That is not something that someone is going to agree or disagree with. However, if you said, as the first president, George Washington was an effective leader in dealing with problems A, B, and C, versus someone else that might have said, as the first president, George Washington was effective in this area but did not do a good job handling this stuff, that's argumentative. Someone could look at that and say, no, that's not correct. So it is not just a statement of fact, although you kind of say it like that, it has to be something that is a position, okay, not opinion. I don't like to use the word opinion here because opinion, one, makes it sound like you can say whatever you want and be correct, and that's not true. And the other reason I don't like using the word opinion is because that tempts you to write in the first person, which, as we will see later, we never do that. It has to do more than just restate the question. Okay, it cannot just restate the question. So, for example, if we had a question that said, to what extent did the American Revolution change American society? It would not be enough for you just to say, the American Revolution changed American society a lot. Okay, that's just restating. You've got to have something that is more argumentative, more defensible than that. I'm going to walk you through some examples here in a moment where you will see these things happening. And it also needs to, now this is something that I show you the rubric, which you actually already have it, it's in that packet that you've got. The rubric, as far as the thesis statement is concerned, it's only 1 point out of the whole thing. And it does not mention this one right here. However, I still think this is hugely important. And I want you to learn how to write a thesis statement doing this, providing organizational categories. Because if you don't, in my opinion, and I've done this a long time, if you don't have organizational categories, it's not going to be very good. That is not something that you're specifically going to get a point for, and you can still get a point for the thesis statement even without organizational categories. However, I get concerned that the rest of the paper won't be good, the rest of the essay won't be good without organizational categories. Now, what I mean by organizational categories, how many of you have written a thesis statement where you had to have like 3 little topics in it? Yes, you've done that? And when you wrote your whole paper or your essay, what did those 3 little things in that thesis statement become as you went through it? What did you do with those 3 little topics in your thesis statement? Yes? They became the body paragraphs, right? You had a body paragraph for each one of those things. You need to do that here. These could be very broad categories. These 3 words, very important. Okay, economic, social, political, ESP, ESP. In the past, you would have done an assignment where you did all kinds of broad words like this. They make great categories if you are looking for some, but oftentimes just the content itself can become the category. But you need to have some kind of way that you're structuring this and setting it up so that the body is going to make sense and connect to the thesis. So try ESP. You can always sub one out for something else, like perhaps you could say geographical or cultural or philosophical, these kind of broad words like that. They make good categories. However, you could even go more narrow. The way they've changed some things on this, you can go even more narrow than that, which I really kind of like. So it needs to address the question. It needs to take a position and be argumentative. It cannot just be a restate of the question. And it needs to provide some organizational categories, okay? Now, here is the formula that you can use to write a good, solid thesis statement that will work nearly every time. This is a great habit to get yourself in. This is a new concept to me because things have changed when they redid and redesigned some stuff on AP exam a couple of years ago. However, I have found that I really like this. I think it makes it very easy for you to do, but you have to know your content. So we're going to call this the X statement, okay? And it looks like this. This is your formula for how to write a good thesis. And then we'll plug in with the different information and the kind of argument we're going to make. X, or although X, however A and B, therefore Y. I realize that makes no sense to you right this second, but it will. And it takes practice. You have to practice it. But this is a good sort of formula that you can plug in. Now, it's a concept, okay? This is a concept. Meaning it may need to be tweaked a little bit depending on the particular situation. But this is a great starting off point, particularly if you're not as experienced with this kind of writing, which none of you are. This is a little bit different for you. So this will work well for you. And I'm going to give you some breakdown of what these X, A's, B's, and Y's, what they mean. And this will work for whatever type of essay you're looking at, whether it's causation, if it's a compare and contrast, or continuity and change. This will work. Okay, so the X here represents the strongest argument against the argument that you're going to be making. Okay, so let's go back to this example of to what extent did the American Revolution change the American colonies? That's a continuity and change kind of question. So you're arguing, was there more change or was there more continuity? Let's just say, for example, we're going to take the argument that the American Revolution really didn't change American society all that much. They really were already independent. They've been acting that way for a long time, blah, blah, blah. So the X would represent the counter argument to that. That would be okay, these things did change. However, mostly it didn't. So that's like the counter argument to it. So that's where you would say something like that. The A and the B represent the 2 strongest points for your argument. So again, that same example, to what extent did the American Revolution change American society? Let's say we're saying, okay, so yeah, that they are legally and legitimately an independent nation that's recognized by other nations, that changed. Their name changed and all that. But let's say we're going to come up with 2 points to prove that it wasn't all that different. Okay, maybe we will use salutary neglect to say that Britain had never really had much to do with the colonies. Maybe we will use the pattern of self-government as a point. So we would say that although the American Revolution led to legally a new nation, because of the fact that Britain never took a strong interest in the colonies and because they had governed themselves for centuries before, then we have why the assertion, the position. Therefore, the American Revolution did not change American society by a great extent or something along those lines. So it's kind of okay, there's this, but because of this and this is true. And that's how that works. And that would work for any of them. That would work for, although the cause and effect. Okay, although this was a cause, this caused this to happen. This and this were bigger causes, and therefore this is the main reason why such and such happened. Okay, that was continuity and change. If you were doing the compare and contrast, okay, yes, these things are similar for this reason, but because of these two reasons, they're really more different. Okay, you see how that works for any of the styles you're doing. Now you have to know your content. That's the thing that gets most people, is you've got to know the content. Okay, now here's just an example. You don't have to write any of this down. This is a sillier example than the one I was just giving you. This isn't related to history. But let's just, for the sake of argument, see a process here. Here's evaluate the extent of similarities between the towns of Smith Station and Auburn. Okay, so here's a compare and contrast. So what you might want to do is start with a little brainstorming. I made myself a little Venn diagram here, a terrible one, of things that were different than Smith Station and Auburn, like expense and some of the quiet and all that kind of stuff, versus, has the university more crowded, more stores, more things. But then I put some of the things that are the same. We have schools, got churches, got Subway, both of them, all that sort of thing. And then we'll look at that and we'll say, okay, yes, there's some similarities, but I'm going to take the position that they are more different than they are alike, okay? So I'm going to use that X, A and B, therefore Y. And I came up with this. So first of all, I'm going to have my X, my counterpoints, okay, ways that they're similar in that case. Although Smith Station and Auburn are both towns in East Alabama that both provide places for residents to dine, worship, and shop and go to school. Okay, so there's my X. Here's this. However, because of the more quiet, small town atmosphere of Smith Station and the abundance of shops and restaurants in Auburn, they are in fact incredibly different cities. So, okay, here's ways that they are similar, but because of this and because of this, they are in fact different. So that is X. However, A and B, therefore Y. That's how you can do that. So that's a real, not history-related example, but you can see that process, and that would work for any of them. Okay? Now, as far as how we would make this X statement a little bit more of a fine point on making this X statement for different types of essay questions. If it is a cause and effect question, if it's asking about causes and effects, what you would need to do is rank your causes and effects that you're choosing. Or sometimes they'll give it to you, but rank them, okay? Sometimes it might explicitly tell you to rank them, but even if it doesn't, rank them. What do we mean by rank them? Most important to least important. Make that your go-to move when you see cause and effect. Okay? All these things are causes of the revolution, but we're going to rank them to which one we think is the most important versus the least important. So X is the least important, with A and B being the most important. Y is the assertion, or you could flip that around if you wanted to. So if we were doing something American Revolution based, maybe we say, actions by the British military were an important reason why the colonists fought for independence. However, taxation and their principles of self-government are the main reasons. Okay, so there's X, A, and B, therefore Y. If it is a continuity and change version or type of question, in that case, do what I did on that previous example. Identify, decide, take a position as to whether or not there is more continuity in that example. Does this represent more of staying the same? Or is it more of a change? So you could, like that example I just did with Smith Station and Auburn, or the example I was going through a moment ago about, did the American Revolution really change society all that much? Did they really, really change? Or was it a lot of the same kind of stuff? In that case, X is the counter argument. So if I'm saying there's more change, then my X is continuity. If I'm saying there's more continuity, then my X is change. It's whichever one I'm not taking. A and B are the opposite of whatever I just said. Y is the assertion. And we've already seen examples of that. Compare and contrast. You identify the similarities or differences. This is like the one I did with the Smith Station at Auburn. Decide if these things are more the same or are they more different. It's very, very similar to the continuity and change one. X is the counterpoint. A and B are the opposites. Y is what you're asserting. So that's like the Smith Station Auburn one. And again, with practice, I think this does get a good bit easier. It's a little, all these X's and Y's, I realize that's a little confusing when you first see it, but when you slow it down and really start looking at it, it will begin to make a little bit more sense. Okay? All right, so we got 5 minutes. I still got 5 minutes. Okay, so let's walk through this little sample prompt. So analyze the extent. This is an actual one off the AP exam. Most of the ones that you use are not ones that I write. They come off of old AP tests. Analyze the extent to which the 7 Years' War, French and Indian War, marked a turning point in American relations with Great Britain, analyzing what changed and what stayed the same from the period before the war to the period after the war. Okay, so this is a continuity or change. Clearly continuity or change. What changed, what stayed the same. So I kind of made myself some little notes here. I said, okay, what was the same, what was different? And as far as what was the same, the colonists are still self-governing after the French and Indian War. They're continuing to smuggle. They're continuing to disregard British authority. They'd always done that. They're just doing it more intensely after that. What's different? Well, Britain's now trying to exert their authority. Their overall relationship becomes strained. It starts to become hostile. We start to see much more activity between the two of them. So I decided I'm going to take the position that they're more different. Okay, now you could argue it the other way, but I decided here to say they're more different. So I said, okay, changes in British policy after the French and Indian War, such as the proclamation of 1763, that's my evidence, resulted in the American colonists continuing to defy and show little disregard for British authority. However, there's my A and B. Passage of the colonial response to the Stamp Act and Tea Acts demonstrate a massive change in American relations with the British government as the colonists actively demonstrated against British authority. Now, those three things, Proclamation of 1763, Stamp Act, and Tea Acts, those are going to be my categories. Okay, those are the things I'm going to write about in my body paragraphs, and I'm going to use those to prove my point that it was more changed than it was staying the same. Okay. Tomorrow we will go over the contextualization in the body paragraphs, and also tomorrow, I will assign you the LEQ that you're going to be writing next week. So you'll have all the things that you need to start building it, and you will be just outlining, not writing anything. You're going to write in class. I'll explain more of that tomorrow, but I'll assign that. You're not going to write in class tomorrow. I'm just going to give you the question. You can start preparing, and I'll give you the date and all that stuff then. So again, homework tonight is be reading, and to finish up the Articles of Confederation thing that you're working on in class today. I have a class of about 6 or 7 you have already turned it in, which is great, and be ready to wrap that up tomorrow.